So the United States might be standing in the way of Russia being held accountable for war crimes they committed in Ukraine, which is not a good look for us. Also, a leaked report in a German newspaper suggests that a pro-Ukrainian group might actually be behind the Nord Stream sabotage bombings. So there's that. War crimes tend to be a very emotional subject, and understandably so. I mean, when you look at the things that are held up as examples of war crimes, they're often hard to read about, let alone look at pictures or videos of those things actually occurring. And the United States has really been front and center in calling for Russia to be held accountable for some of these crimes they've committed during the war in Ukraine. Just recently, Vice President Harris said, quote, "The United States has formally determined that Russia has committed crimes against humanity. And I say to all of those who have perpetrated these crimes and to their superiors who are complicit in these crimes, you will be held to account." Secretary of State Blinken added to that there is clear evidence that members of Russia's forces have committed execution-style killings of Ukrainian men, women, and children, torture of civilians in detention through beatings, electrocution, mock executions, and rape. But there's reports coming out now that the U.S. Department of Defense is unwilling to provide intelligence that could be used to investigate and prosecute some of those crimes against humanity. So this is one of those things where at the same time, there's a lot of nuance to it, and it's also very, very simple. In terms of being very, very simple, the headlines are going to catch a lot of attention. One of the ones I saw here, Pentagon blocks sharing evidence of possible Russian war crimes with Hague Court. That doesn't sound good, and it seems like one of those things that requires an awful lot of explanation to understand why on earth that would be happening, and I have a feeling that the explanation isn't going to win anybody over. Now, the United States has a complicated relationship with the International Criminal Court, and I'm not an attorney, so we're going to stay pretty high level here, but the United States helped draft the Rome Statute that put the ICC in place back in 1999. President Clinton signed, but the Congress did not ratify that treaty, so we never formally joined the criminal court as a state party. Now, the primary argument against this is that the International Criminal Court would have too much unchecked power over U.S. service members that are serving in a war zone anywhere overseas. And the way the U.S. has kind of tried to navigate around this is when abuses or supposed war crimes occur that involve the United States in any capacity, we have historically said we will investigate that event and we will dole out the necessary punishment. I got it, kind of tricky, and I fully understand that if right now Russia said that they are going to hold trials for supposed war crimes that their troops committed in Ukraine, we would be the first ones to say, not good enough, not going to be a fair trial, send them to the International Criminal Court. Kind of hard to do that because we don't send our troops to the International Criminal Court for trial, on top of which Russia is not a member of the ICC, which raises some questions about jurisdiction. What authority does the ICC have over countries that are not party to that agreement? I think that's probably where you're seeing the pushback from the U.S. Department of Defense in terms of providing intelligence that we have that would support these investigations of Russian war crimes. Sort of under the idea that if we're going to use this system that we're not a party to but leverage to our benefit, couldn't another country do the same against U.S. troops? Again, it's not a good look. And I think any explanations that we start to hear out of the government or the Department of Defense probably are not going to be convincing enough for most people to, brush away the headline that in some way, shape, or form, the U.S. is preventing Russian war crimes from being punished. All right, but moving on to the Nord Stream pipeline, which I'm becoming ever more convinced that we'll never actually know the story of what happened here for 50 plus years after this war ends. Hear me out. So when the pipeline was first damaged 6-7 months ago, a lot of the initial finger pointing was directed at Russia. I ran a poll on this channel, and I'm sure it's got its own bias and influence and all that stuff, but 157,000 votes. Who do you think attacked the Nord Stream pipeline? Russia won that poll, led that poll at 48%. United States was second at 32%. Now, at this time, I think that was probably pretty reflective of opinions in the United States and most of Europe. Again, most of the early looks were directed at Russia. Since then, there have been some reports saying that there's no evidence that Russia was involved in this. And personally, I feel like if there was one little tiny shard of concrete evidence pointing to Russia, we would have heard about that right away and everyone would have run with it. That hasn't come out. Instead, what we've seen over the last few months was a piece published by Seymour Hersh, came out about a month ago on February 8th, telling a story of how the United States directed and carried out the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline. Now, the idea here, big picture in Seymour's piece, which I have to say has been criticized because it is essentially single source and doesn't name any of the sources. Take that for what it's worth. It's an interesting piece and worth reading. But the high-level premise there is that attacking and destroying this Nord Stream pipeline that was providing gas to Germany, it would kind of coalesce the NATO allies around this unified mission of supporting Ukraine and fighting against Russia. Then last week, a German newspaper came out saying that German prosecutors, again, not giving names, which kind of seems to be a theme in this whole investigation, the German prosecutors found traces of evidence indicating that a pro-Ukrainian group that leased a boat in Poland was responsible for attacking the Nord Stream pipeline. So in this case, it appears, again, that the idea is kind of like a false flag attack, that somehow this would be pinned on Russia, and that would garner support from Western allies, NATO, Europe, the United States, to kind of continue, maybe even increase their support of Ukraine. Now, a couple of big, really important caveats with this kind of speculative piece, I think we have to call it at this point. Kyiv and Moscow both said they have no idea what this article is talking about, and Germany and NATO and the United States all said, hold on, let's give it some time. We need more information to come out. So it's not as though anybody's jumping on this report saying that it is 100% factually true. But going back to what I originally said, how I don't think we're going to actually have the real information of what happened here for decades. There might be some clues in different directions, but I'm talking about like real hard, tangible evidence, 100% without a doubt, we know what happened. I think that's off the table because of the implications that would have on the global stage. Here's what I mean. So if you can just check the I believe box with me here for a second. Let's say we have indisputable evidence. Say it's a 4K video recording start to finish of somebody carrying out this attack. If it was the United States, if it was a pro-Ukrainian group, which I actually had somebody say that the CIA is a pro-Ukrainian group, so it kind of fits, which is funny, but I don't think that's what the article is getting at. So a pro-Ukrainian group, either with or without the tacit support of the Ukrainian government, and then Russia. So really 4 potential options being thrown around here. And I'll include the United Kingdom in the analysis with the United States. There hasn't been anything out linking them to this attack, but right out the gate, I think Russia was saying that the UK was behind it. So we'll include them just for good measure. So if it was the United States or the United Kingdom, this is an attack against the energy infrastructure of one of their NATO allies. It has the potential to fracture the entire NATO relationship as we know it. That's massive. And if it was a pro-Ukrainian group with or without the support of the Ukrainian government, which, to be fair, I haven't seen any reporting or evidence that the Ukrainian government had anything to do with this, but I think the impact of the world stage is probably the same either way. Can't you see politicians either in power or opposition groups seizing on that all around the world and saying, we got to get out of this mess that's going on between Ukraine and Russia? They're trying to drag us in to something that could turn into World War III. I mean, that's a Ukrainian group attacking a NATO country, an act of war against the NATO country. Think about that. And I know the domestic politics are very different in every country, but that's a little bit of a speed bump that you have to get past in order to convince your population, convince your government to continue sending really any sort of aid to Ukraine. And lastly, if it was Russia, and remember we're checking the I believe box, there's indisputable video evidence that miraculously appears or whatever, I actually think that would be the least impactful to the current situation around the world, just because due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there's already been so many actions taken against Russia, economically, militarily, politically. And realistically, if we were to find out that Russia is behind the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline, it's just kind of one more thing. I don't think there's a drastic new step this conflict would go in. So maybe that's sort of my pessimistic view here. If the United States or Ukraine in any way, shape, or form was behind the attack of the pipeline, there would be a lot of countries around the world that wouldn't want that information to come out in a definitive, concrete manner, just to the ripple effects, the damage that it would cause all around the world. That's why it just seems like this is one of those things where we're going to get a bunch of nuggets of information over time that point in a bunch of different directions, just enough to where we feel like we don't really have the absolute perfect answer with 100% concrete evidence. And then you'll blink and it'll be 40 years from now and we'll find out that country X was fully behind it. But that's all I got for now. Hope you all have a great weekend. We'll see y'all next time.